Everyone, welcome to Chitter Chatter. Today is a Chitter Chatter with a storyteller who doesn't just write stories, but she reimagines an entire world. She gives voice to unheard characters. She gives mythology a turn into an emotion that we can't even imagine. Be it Palace of Illusions, Forest of Enchantments, and when you read her books, if you're not transported into a different world, I guarantee you will come back and thank me later for this. So let's invite Chitra ma'am for this chitter chatter and let's get started. Hello ma'am, welcome to Chitter Chatter.
Hello. I'm so happy to be on a Chitter Chatter with you.
I am more than happy because I am having a big fan moment chatting with you. Because right from your Palace of Illusions, I have been a big fan. I have read your books, I've reread your books.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So,
That's a real pleasure to know this.
before the awards and global readership, where were you as a storyteller? When did these stories first start speaking to you?
Well, I've been thinking about these stories, especially from our Indian mythology and epics, ever since I was a child, because I was very blessed. My grandfather used to tell me these stories when I was little. So, from that time, they were deep inside me. And I think as I grew older as a girl and then a woman, I began to think, well, these wonderful women are in our epics, but where are their stories? What are they thinking? What are they feeling? And I think that's when I started thinking if I ever become a writer, I would like to write from their angle of vision, their voice.
You wrote the voice of Draupadi, Palace of Illusions. That was a time where people were still not giving voice to unheard stories of mythology. Was there
This
a fear to give a mythological character a voice and give her point of view to the world?
It was quite scary for me to do that because, as you said, at that time, that was not a popular genre. And almost no one was writing those books. And even my husband, who's a big supporter of my writing, said, I don't know, is it a good idea? These are our ancient epics. Do you really want to retell that story? But I felt very strongly that I wanted to tell. But it was really in the forefront of what then became very popular later, the retellings of the mythology, the retellings of the epics.
So, how did growing up in Kolkata and then moving abroad shape your storytelling, your voice?
Well, I have to say, those stories were deep inside me, and a lot of my other books, as you might know, are also set in Kolkata or they deal with Bengali women, especially. Some of them have gone abroad, so I bring in immigrant life. So I think a lot of my own experiences are woven into the book, especially when I write about the city of Kolkata. I write with a lot of fondness because I grew up there. I know that city really well.
So, do you think that writing became a way to go back home for you?
Very much so. When I was as I was living abroad, and those were the days when I moved in the 1970s. No WhatsApp, no internet. Calling home was very expensive. You had to write those airmail letters, and it took a long time. And I felt very disconnected. So the old stories were away. The books, I did manage to bring some Bengali books with me so that I could read them. And that just gave me a sense of being home. So then I wanted to write my experiences, not biographical, but from the same background. And that was a way of connecting. It was very important for me in those early years.
Your stories often carry a sense of longing. Does that come from personal experiences or how does that happen in your books?
A lot of times, if they're contemporary immigrant stories, they're based on what I see around me. And that is the paradox of immigrant life, right? One part of you is living in this other country and has a whole full experience here, but one part of you is always remembering, always longing, always missing the people you left behind. So that's just a very true part of the immigrant experience. And I wanted to put that into my books. But also at the same time, immigration is changing us so that when we go back to our home countries, the country has also changed. We have also changed. And therefore, it is problematic. But as you know, from problems, we get good literature, right? We get good stories.
So, do you write like from memory, imagination, or emotion? If you had to choose one, I know it's a combination of all, but if you had to give the priorities, how would it be ranked?
It's always imagination first. I have to really imagine the character, and then only I can feel their emotions, and then the plot will come. So that would be how my writing works.
So let's get back to Palace of Illusions. I mean, I was a little girl when I read that book, and I have always found the Mahabharata very exciting because there are so many stories, there's so many characters. There's just so much that story itself offers. Like every time you read that story, there is a new angle to it. But as a kid, when I read Palace of Illusions, it was like suddenly something I was thinking that what does this character think? And you gave it to us on the plateau that, okay, this is what she thinks. And it felt so real. So, what made you choose Draupadi's voice instead of the traditional Mahabharata narrative?
Well, from a long time, from the time I was in college, I've been involved in women's issues. And, I'm an activist in the field of women's issues, especially women's education, women's employment, women's removing women from situations of abuse and starting a new life. And so it was very important for me to choose a woman's voice because if I were going to choose a male voice, well, the wonderful writer Vyasa has already done a great job with that. I didn't want to redo that. I wanted to listen for the silenced voices, the ignored voices, but those who played an important part, but we never stopped to think, what are they feeling? That was my enterprise.
Well, I must say, be it every book of yours from Palace of Illusion, Mistress of Spices, The Last Queen, Forest of Enchantment, you've always had the feminist lens. And we know it now because, you've been actively involved in the woman power. But, when you sit as a woman and you write about a story of a strong woman, how do you maintain that balance between you and the character?
So when I start writing, I go away. And it's really only the character. So the whole focus is on the character. When the writing is going really well, it's almost like I forget myself. And I'm in her voice, I'm in her head, whether it is Draupadi in Palace of Illusions, whether it is Sita in Forest of Enchantments, or the three sisters in Independence. I become those people, or they become me, we could say. And I only begin to see and feel through their eyes. In fact, it's a very interesting experience when I'm deep in a book and I stop writing, let's say for the day, and I'm going to go do other things that I do. Maybe I'm going to go have lunch with my family. It feels really weird. It feels like, wait, where am I right now? So the power of the imagination is something quite amazing. Without it, I wouldn't be able to write.
We were talking about just a little prior, we were talking about the fear of giving voice to Draupadi. Like we discussed back then, the female didn't have the voice, even in general to the society, and giving a mythological character a voice was obviously scary and fearful. But you decided to give her the voice. Like that was something. The Forest of Enchantment came later, and by then, still, it was quietly, like I'm sure the fear would be less because the society had changed, the readers had changed. But when it was
There were more books like that coming out by then. Although the Forest of Enchantments also scared me because that's really a sacred story, right? I'm writing now from the point of view of a goddess who has come to earth. So Draupadi was a human being. I could give her a lot of faults. I had to think very carefully. Sita is also a complex character. She also has faults because she's in a human body. She's going to
Right.
have human faults. But that was scary in a whole other way.
So, what were the biggest fears before you started penning the whole thing down?
I think when I was writing Palace of Illusions, my fear was that no one would be interested in this story because no one was writing this kind of story. Even my publisher said, "Are you sure people will want to read this story? Everybody knows this story already." So that was the fear, that will people relate to the story? And I have to say, I am so thankful and I was so surprised that it touched so many people and so many hearts. And even now, 15 years after it's come out, it's the book that most readers write to me about. So that was just, I'm just thankful. What can I say? It was just amazing. And when writing Sita's character, the fear was different because by then, yes, mythology was being written about, but also the times had changed and people had become very touchy about religion. So, I was concerned about that. And I wanted to write the story truly and I wanted to make it accurate and respectful, but I had to give Sita her voice. There are times when in the Ramayana, Sita is treated badly, she's treated wrongly, and she's a courageous woman. She speaks out. Even in the original Ramayana, she speaks out against what she has to go through. And I had to put that in my book, but I was a little scared. Like, how will people respond to it?
I still remember, like, it's like I'm literally short of words because it's like from years I've read your book, and now finally that you're here, I have so many questions, and I'm like just enjoying my fan moment. So it's like
Well,
suddenly
thank you so
I
much.
look
I'm
at
so
you and
glad
I'm
you
like,
have read.
so
Well, I am so appreciative that you have read and enjoyed. I really appreciate that.
I still remember, like we discussed, now a lot of characters have got voice. Be it Karna's wife, be it Ravana, all of them, like so many. And every time I pick up that book, my first thing is like, my first moment is when I've read The Palace of Illusions. It's like, you can't start a new book till you give that credit or the due that's there. So, like when you
Thank
were interpreting these stories, like you said, they are so sacred, they're widely known. So the fears is there. I'm sure even when you were writing and when it got released, there might be some people who must have come back with like, why this? And those kind of criticisms too. So how did you handle it emotionally?
Right, right. I think I put myself in a mental space where I reminded myself, look, I've done the best I could. I did it with good intention, and it's not going to affect everybody positively. But as long as most people, many people, and especially women, feel that something about the woman's experience is being put out there, and they feel like they can relate to Draupadi, they can relate to Sita. Draupadi's challenges and Sita's difficulties enable them to become more courageous about their lives. If that happens even to a few people, I'm satisfied. There may be criticisms, I'll just accept those. So that was the mindset with which I went into after the publication of the books.
So do you see your books as retelling or interpretations or emotional truths?
Yes, yes, I think that they allow us to see these amazing epic stories from a different angle. And we have to remember that, yes, right now in our contemporary times, uh, Palace of Illusions kind of started a movement, but through the ages, epics have always been retold. Like, the Ramayana, Tulsidas ji retold it. Many other people have retold it, right? Rajagopalachari retold it, even with the Mahabharata. And in both of these cases, there have been wonderful Bengali writers who have written it in verse. And I read both of those. So I knew I was writing in a tradition. I was not breaking tradition. In fact, I was just continuing a tradition. And I wanted people to understand it, that in our culture, there was this feeling that these great stories, I can make them my own and I can present them to you in a different angle. So I was really following a very time tested tradition of retelling epics. So, when first Palace of Illusions came out and people would interview me, I pointed out my sources. I said, I read the original Vyasa Mahabharat, but then I also read Kashiram Das, who's the Bengali writer of the Mahabharat, and I read, several others. So I said, I'm really just following in their footsteps.
If Draupadi could read your book today, what do you think she would come and tell you?
She would probably say, "You got it all wrong. Now I have to tell you the whole story again," because she's that kind of feisty character. Or she might say, "Okay, you got that part right, but this part, no, that's not what I was thinking."
Your women are so strong, but they're also flawed. Like, the best part is you make them real in spite of giving them the strength. You show their flaws. You show that they're, emotional, vulnerable. Why is that so important? Is it to connect to the reality with the readers, or what is it?
Yes, you are so right. It is to connect my readers with the reality of what a woman is. It's also to break a tradition in our culture, but also in many cultures in the world, where women are expected to be perfect. Okay, a good woman has to be perfect. Otherwise, she can't be admired. Otherwise, she can't be kind of held up as a good woman. And my whole attitude is no, women are human and wonderful women can have flaws, just like men are always allowed to have flaws. Great heroes have big flaws, but they're still heroic. Similarly, it's just the same thing with women. And they should never be whitewashed. They should never be portrayed as, better than life, because that's not the human experience. That's what I wanted to show through Draupadi and through Sita, definitely through those two, but also through historical characters like in The Last Queen, Maharani Jinda. She's an amazing character and she's a fun character to write. And she was so strong in fighting against the British. But yes, she had flaws. She was impulsive. She would do things and regret them later. She would fight with people. She did all those things, but that doesn't lessen her greatness, right? That's the big message I want to send. Women, be yourselves with all your flaws. Don't try to pretend that you're perfect. You don't have to be perfect. None of us have to be perfect. We just have to be human.
Do you think mythology failed its women or misunderstood them?
Well, uh, the original texts were written at a time when it was a very male centered culture, right? All of the books, pretty much, with a very small exception, were written by men. Therefore, they were written the way men saw things, the way men wanted things to be. Even like the great books, they're very much seen from a male angle. Therefore, male heroism, battle prowess, all of those become central, right? The male plotting that goes on, the political plotting that goes on, that becomes central. Those are the big things in the Mahabharata. When I was rereading the Mahabharata, I was looking and laughing, but also kind of, you know, half laughing and half crying, because there are pages and pages given descriptions of the weapons of the heroes. Okay. And the women don't even get that much space as the weapons, right? The weapons, which are just objects, they are given more respect and more page space than what the women are thinking. And I thought, wow, okay, I have to change that.
So, is writing a form of activism?
Definitely, it is for me a form of activism, but I have to approach it carefully because I have to balance the art and the activism. If I make it like as though I'm lecturing people, then the book will completely fail, right? The character has to be, um, I don't know, magical, right? The character has to be alive. The character has to invite the reader into her story. And so I have to really think of the character first and the activist idea later.
So, are your characters born powerful, or do they become powerful when things go through pain or when your pen starts penning them down?
It depends on the characters, but I think generally they really recognize their strength when they are in situations of trouble and problems. Even Sita, who was born a princess, even Draupadi, who was born a princess, they don't have much, um, what shall I say, they don't have much agency when they are younger. It is only when they are pushed to the corner that they find that strength in themselves. And certainly that is the case with Maharani Jinda in The Last Queen, and the three sisters who are the heroines of independence. They're just ordinary girls with, fairly ordinary dreams. One of them wants to get married into a rich household, for example. But when they are faced with danger, when they are faced with problems, that's when they reach inside and find the strength that I do believe all women have. Probably I could say all human beings have a core of strength. There's I don't know, a divine core in all of us. If we can reach it, if we can touch it, it will shine for us. And that's what happens to some of the women in my book. Now, not every woman is going to become a hero, right? There are other characters, there are side characters. They're faced by danger, they're faced by disaster, they can't handle it. And that too is part of, human nature and the human experience. So I wanted to show all kinds of men and women in my books. Otherwise, the world would not be complete, right? The world would not be realistic.
So I had my first book marathon with your book Independence, where I started it in the night, and I think within 24 hours I was done, and I was feeling left out because suddenly I was like, "Oh my god, my characters—they've left me and gone." There was this strong loss when I was done with the book.
Oh, and that makes me so happy to hear that the characters really came alive with in for you. They came alive for you, and you walked their journey with them. That makes me very happy. That is what I hope for as a writer. Very much what I hope for.
So your stories move from mythology to contemporary life, and they are woven very seamlessly. So how do you shift between these worlds?
I before when I finish a book, I have to take some time off so that mentally I have to exit that fictional world, and then I start doing research for my next book. And when I start doing the research, then I'm really looking at all the sources, and I'm looking at photographs, I'm looking at old paintings, I'm looking at, for independence, all the newspaper articles that I could find about in the 1940s what was going on in Bengal. So then I enter another fictional world. And, there's like a real division. I have to take that time and make that division. Otherwise, I couldn't enter that new world completely. And that's very important for me. I have to kind of seep myself in that atmosphere before I can start writing.
So do you start with a character, emotion, or a feeling?
I think I start with the character. It's really important for me to even like visualize. So, I visualized, for example, Draupadi as she is, as a young woman, as, a teenager. She's asking her nursemaid, tell me the story of my birth. And then the nursemaid tells her. So I had to imagine that whole scene before I could even get into the book at all, even before I could even write a word. With Maharani Jinda also, I had to imagine. I had done all the research that she was the daughter of, the palace dog trainer, and how amazing that she becomes the favorite queen of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. So, having read that story, I started imagining what was her life like as a girl before she even got to the palace. And I had to really visualize that scene where she's waking up in the morning and they're not rich. So she's going to go with her brother to steal fruits from a neighbor orchard because there isn't enough to eat. So I had to really, I had to feel that character. And then I could start writing. When I feel the character, then the emotions come. And then I start writing.
But feeling so many characters in this span of time and with the success of Touch with each and every book, have you ever struggled with self doubt even after so many successful books?
It's every time I start a new book, and right now I'm in the middle of a book, it's always tough. Writing is not easy, at least for me. I have to put a lot of time into it. I get stuck in the middle of books, and it's a terrible feeling when I'm stuck. I'm like, how will I get out of this writer's block? And then I pray, "Oh, please help, help, help." I have to work through it. So some things are easier, but not everything. And with every book, it is a whole other project. And I'm never sure. And with every book, I want to challenge myself a little more. I'm pushing myself a little more to write a more difficult story. So it's always tough. But
So, what do you do?
I'm happy about that because I grow. The book grows.
But what do you do on days when the words don't come?
Yes, I get very frustrated. And then, my whole family, they stay out of my way. They're like, oh gosh, she's in her writer's block. But then I try to read something because sometimes when I read, then I get into that, whatever book I'm reading, I get into that fictional world. And then I'm like, okay, let me see, how is the writer doing this? Okay, here's a scene where two people are fighting. How has the writer brought that to life? Then I'm looking at their techniques. And that sometimes gets me out of writer's block.
What has writing taught
But yes, I
you?
become very sorry, say that again.
What has writing taught you as a person about love, about loss, about yourself?
One of the things that writing has taught me is that, it's really taught me to be very thankful, because just the fact that I'm a writer makes me feel so thankful and appreciative, because I feel that the inspiration comes from some other divine higher source. And I'm just so thankful to be the recipient of it. I'm like totally 100% thankful for just the fact that this is in my life, that writing is in my life. Also, I think as I look at all the different characters and I do research, and I do research about women's lives down the ages, it has made me so much more sympathetic to women's issues and women's problems, and it's helped me understand what women go through, and it's made me a lot more I don't know, just more aware. It's made me much more aware of how women live in the world. And it's made me, on one hand, very thankful and appreciative for all of the education that I was given, the fact that I'm in a home and a marriage where my husband is supportive of what I do and helps me make time for it. But it also makes me aware of all the women who don't have this. And so I want to do something to help them as well. And that's, I think, one of the reasons I got into activism in women's areas of empowerment.
If your life was called a book, what would this chapter be called?
If my life was called a book, it would be a very boring book because I mostly, I do only a few things. I teach at the University of Houston. I teach writers, which I love. I love working with young writers, and I write. And, I'm a family person and I have a meditation practice, and I like doing like yoga, and I like going to the gym, and that's all that my life is. So it's not It's not very exciting. I'm not one of those people. For research purposes, I'll go to places. And, when my books come out, I'll go to places. But other than that, I'm just a homebody. And if you give me a good book and some nice homemade khana, I'm very happy. So I think my book would be just called The Boring Writer's Life.
You tell young writers who feel their voice isn't strong enough yet or have some of the excuses before they start penning down.
I would say go ahead and start writing. Until you start, you're not going to get better. And truly, before I had the books that became successful and got published, my first novel, Mistress of Spices, which was made into a movie, before that, I wrote lots of bad things, which I threw away because I could see that they were bad, they were incomplete, I didn't know how to finish them. And so that is very natural. It's important not to lose heart. If you really want to write, if that is something important for you, you've got to work at it. Okay. And I kind of did things the hard way because when I was starting to write, there weren't many like writing programs. But now I would say to writers, there are so many writing programs. They're online. They're very easy to get to. There are schools, colleges, um, you know, community programs where writers can join other writers, get some feedback on their books. And I would say go for your dream. Definitely go for your dream. Give it the best shot you have because you never know what is hidden in there, what talent is waiting there to be given the opportunity to come out. That's what I would say to everyone. I was not a good writer when I started, and I had to try over and over and over. But I mean, I am so happy that I stayed with it. And that's what I want for everyone who has that desire and who might have that hidden talent.
Thank you for these really words that are inspiring for all of us here because everyone has a story, but they don't have the discipline or the courage to write it. And also, thank you for fulfilling my fan moment to have this chitter chatter with you. But before we end, I would have a
Thank
quick rapid fire.
you. Okay.
So, one character you'd love to have coffee with.
I think Draupadi.
Draupadi or Sita, who do you relate to more?
Now, as an older woman, Sita.
Mythology or modern fiction?
Mythology.
One book you wish you had written.
Okay. Pride and Prejudice. I love that book.
One word your readers would use for you.
Um, Amazing. That's what I'd like readers to use.
What are you, a writer, an escapist?
A writer, a realist.
Mythology?
Yeah.
Mythology reimagined or historical drama?
Mythology reimagined.
One book everyone must read.
Palace of Illusions.
Strongest female protagonist.
Draupadi.
Comfort read.
My comfort read. Oh gosh, I'm stumped. I'm stumped. Let me think. What do I love to read? Okay, I love reading adventure, like fantasy adventure. So, a book that I read many times is The Lord of the Rings. I've read it a lot of times.
Books that feel like magic plus food plus emotion.
From my writing or from other people's?
You can choose from your writing because there is one book right there.
From my writing, the Mistress of Spices.
Underrated gem when it comes to a book.
Underrated gem. Oh gosh, you have tough questions. Underrated gem. The book that I want everyone to read. Okay, the Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale.
One word which is a vibe of your writing.
Imaginative,
If your books were a mood, what mood would it be?
hopeful.
A book from all your writings that has really stayed with you. I mean, all babies are special when they're your own, but one book that is a little extra.
Forest of Enchantments. I think I learned most from that book about just being a human being.
Palace of Illusions, the word that comes to your mind when I say your title.
Magical,
Forest of Enchantment.
Forest of Enchantments. Love. That novel is about the real nature of love.
Mistress of Spices.
Fun. I had a lot of fun writing that book.
The Last Queen.
Resilience. That's what Maharani Jinda means to me.
Sister of My Heart.
Women's friendship.
And if there was a book that you've not written, but you just had to give the title and start writing, what would the title be?
So difficult. Okay, I'm just thinking of writing this book, and it's going to be a fantasy adventure, and I think I want to call it Mountain of Bone.
Wow, it's quite intriguing. Complete this sentence. Stories are powerful because.
They can transform you.
So, thank you so much for entertaining us with your books and making the women characters talk, which all of us have been deprived of at one time. So, thank you so much for all of that and for this chitter chatter.
Thank you so much. And thank you for all the wonderful things you do, especially making books available to people, talking about books, among all the other things you also bring to people. I really appreciate that you bring books to so many of your fan base. So thank you for having me on Chitter Chatter. It was a lot of fun.
Likewise, thank you, and hopefully we shall have more chitter chatters with you with all the coming books and a lot of words pouring out there.
Thank you so much.